On the vast plains of North America, winter was always the harshest challenge for the Native Americans. When blizzards swept in and the wind howled as if trying to tear the earth apart, most modern houses today would quickly turn into frozen prisons. Yet families living in tipis were able to endure for months thanks to incredibly clever survival strategies. They knew blizzards usually came from the northwest, so instead of resisting head-on, they turned the narrowest side of the teepee into the wind. That pointed cone shape acted like a blade, splitting the fierce gusts and reducing the pressure on the entire structure. When storms grew more brutal, they even coated the outer hide with a layer of solidified animal fat. This greasy shield kept wind and moisture sliding off instead of seeping through tiny gaps. The entrance of the teepee was also ingeniously managed. Packed snow sealed it tight, turning what seemed like a cold enemy into natural insulation. Inside, families often dug small pits in the floor. Thanks to a simple law of physics, cold air is heavier and sinks. These pits became cold traps, while the warmer air stayed above, creating a more comfortable living environment. Because of this, children, the elderly, and those most vulnerable to the cold could still sleep soundly through long snowstorms. These practices show that the Native Americans did not merely confront nature with bravery, but skillfully turned nature itself into a protective ally. For them, survival in a blizzard depended not on brute strength, but on intelligence, keen observation, and hard-earned wisdom passed down through generations. When talking about the survival abilities of Native Americans during harsh winters, many people immediately think of improvisations like sealing the teepee entrance with snow, coating the outer hides with animal fat, or digging cold air pits in the floor. But all of those measures only worked effectively because they were built upon the intelligent design of the teepee, one of the simplest yet most durable structures humans have ever created. From the very first glance, the tall cone shape of the teepee reveals its logic. On the open plains, heavy snow could quickly collapse a flat roof. But with the steep cone, snow slid down continuously, never accumulating enough to cause dangerous pressure. Likewise, the fierce, relentless winter winds met the rounded walls and were forced to sweep around instead of striking head-on. This was a principle of natural aerodynamics that native people had mastered hundreds of years before modern science ever explained it. Another clever feature was the smoke hole at the top. In winter, keeping a fire was essential for survival, but without ventilation, residents would suffocate inside their own warm refuge. The smoke hole allowed fumes to escape while still holding in much of the heat. At the same time, the conical shape created a convection current. Heat rose, spread along the sloping walls, and only then exited, ensuring warmth circulated evenly throughout the living space. With this system, even a small fire was enough to heat an entire family. Equally important was the teepee's mobility. When a blizzard shifted direction, a heavy log cabin became a liability. In contrast, a teepee could be dismantled and reassembled in less than an hour by experienced hands. This was a huge advantage for native peoples who lived nomadic lives and had to adapt quickly. The hides covering the teepee weren't just stretched randomly either. They were overlapped like natural shingles, so rain and melting snow ran down instead of seeping through. Many tribes even used a double wall system, with an air gap between two hide layers, operating on the same principle as modern insulated jackets. What's fascinating is that the cone didn't just resist wind and snow. It also gave the structure surprising strength. When strong winds pressed against it, the force was distributed evenly across the surface, making the whole teepee more stable. The harder the storm pushed, the more firmly the teepee clung to the earth. In short, while clever improvisations helped Native Americans get through each storm, it was the fundamental design of the teepee that provided lasting resilience. It was a brilliant fusion of experience, observation, and ingenuity, transforming what seemed like a fragile hide tent into a fortress against the brutal winter. If the conical design of the teepee laid the foundation for withstanding wind and snow, then to enhance its effectiveness, Native Americans ingeniously created additional layers of insulation and reinforcement. One of the most common techniques was hanging liner hides, extra interior hides, inside the teepee, about a meter above the ground. This created a pocket of still air between the outer covering and the liner, acting as natural insulation, much like the layered winter jackets we use today. By trapping this air, the warmth from the central fire didn't escape immediately but lingered longer within the living space. Beyond liners, many tribes also used the ozan, essentially a smaller tent inside the larger one. The ozan reduced the heated area, keeping warmth concentrated around the living and sleeping spaces. Most impressively, Native Americans cleverly turned their greatest enemy, snow, into an ally. They packed snow tightly around the base of the teepee, forming a natural white wall that blocked drafts from entering through gaps. Paradoxically, compacted snow became excellent insulation, holding heat inside for much longer. Their ingenuity didn't stop there. They stuffed straw, dried grass, pine needles, and even worn-out animal fur into cracks, transforming them into natural insulating fibers. Some tribes went further, building massive windbreaks of wood, stone, or packed earth, sometimes several meters tall, forcing blizzards to weaken before ever striking the teepee. With these protective armors, the teepee was no longer a simple hide tent but a multi-layered shelter. Fire's warmth was preserved, cold winds were blocked, and snow, once a deadly threat, became a defensive shield. This stands as clear proof of Native American survival wisdom, using nature itself to fight against nature. After building a sturdy teepee with strong outer hides and clever insulation methods like liners and ozans, the most important element to make that space truly livable was the central fire. If the teepee were a living body, the fire was its heart, pumping warmth into every corner. The Native Americans understood that without fire, no amount of insulation could keep out the cold. Keeping the flames alive wasn't just a habit, it was a principle of survival. The fire was always placed at the center of the teepee. That spot was not only convenient for daily life but also a scientific choice. Heat radiated evenly in all directions, met the liner and ozone layers, and was held inside, creating a blanket of warmth throughout. Around the fire pit, large stones were arranged in a circle. These stones absorbed heat when the fire blazed, then released it slowly as the flames died down, acting like natural radiators that kept the family from freezing suddenly during the night. This simple yet effective idea ensured steady warmth even when more fuel wasn't immediately available. But in a blizzard, finding dry wood was never easy. Native Americans turned to other fuel sources: dried buffalo dung, pine cones rich in flammable oils, or dense hardwoods that burned long and hot. These choices kept the fire burning steadily for hours. This tied directly into the insulation system. Only with a continuous fire could the snowbanks, grass stuffing, or hide coverings fully do their job of holding in warmth. Even more ingenious was the underground air channel system. Small trenches were dug from outside the teepee straight to the fire pit, then covered with flat stones. This provided the fire with a steady oxygen supply without having to open the entrance, where icy drafts could rush in. Combined with adjustable smoke flaps at the top, the fire could burn brightly while keeping the air inside breathable. It was a perfect balance, controlling both hot and cold air for survival on especially brutal blizzard nights. They even had backups. Small clay or metal pots were placed near sleeping areas, each holding a tiny auxiliary fire. These little heat sources weren't strong enough to replace the main hearth, but they were lifesavers against frostbite if the central fire went out. This careful planning was the community's plan B, ensuring no one was left vulnerable to the cold. In the end, the central fire was far more than light and warmth. It was the axis of their entire survival system, interwoven with insulation, hides, and strict living rules. With intelligence and patience, the Native Americans turned a modest flame into the very foundation of a warm fortress in the heart of a raging blizzard. If the central fire was the heart that sustained life inside the teepee, then the insulating materials were the flesh and skin that shielded the human body from the brutal cold. Native Americans understood that fire could only warm the space, but to protect each individual from freezing temperatures, they needed carefully prepared blankets, bedding, and clothing. Among these, bison hides were the most valuable. Thick bison hides draped over the outside of the teepee formed sturdy walls that blocked icy winds. Inside, they were spread into bedding or worn as cloaks, serving as protective barriers that held warmth close to the body. It wasn't only bison. Other animal furs such as bear, deer, rabbit, and fox were fully utilized. Each had a distinct purpose. Bear hides, thick and warm, were used as heavy covers. Rabbit fur, soft and light, was perfect for lining, and deer hides, lighter and more flexible, were crafted into clothing. Layered together, they created a multi-tiered insulation system, much like modern down jackets. Sleeping arrangements inside the teepee were also carefully designed. At the bottom lay mats made of willow branches or dried grass, and above them multiple layers of hides were stacked, both insulating against the frozen ground and conserving body heat. Clothing was another vital part of the warmth strategy. Native Americans wore multiple layers of fur garments, with boots stuffed with dry grass or straw for extra insulation. They considered these outfits as portable heaters, allowing them to endure biting winds even when stepping outside into blizzards. However, they also knew that hides and furs only worked when dry. That's why families were meticulous about maintaining, drying, and replacing them when necessary. Clearly, insulating materials were far more than mere hides or coats. They represented the outcome of experience, observation, and persistent labor. Combined with the central fire, they formed a closed survival system that allowed people not only to endure but even to live relatively normally in conditions that otherwise no one could withstand. If animal hides and furs served as armor protecting the body from the bitter cold, then the survival principles were the unwritten laws that ensured the entire system worked effectively. Native Americans understood that hides and fire alone were not enough. To withstand a blizzard that could last for days or even weeks, strict discipline was required in every action, from how they sat, how they slept, to how tasks were divided inside the teepee. The first principle was to never sit or lie directly on the frozen ground. No matter how many hides were laid down, the winter earth would quickly drain heat from the body. That's why they always spread willow branches, dry grass, or thick mats first, then layered hides on top. This separated people from the cold trap beneath their feet. It was the perfect complement to insulating materials. Only when used properly could they reach full effectiveness. The second principle was to sleep near the fire and close together. The central fire radiated heat evenly, but to maximize it, families would huddle together under thick bison hides. The combination of body heat and fire warmth created a stable microclimate, helping everyone endure the long, freezing nights. It was also the best way to protect children and the elderly from hypothermia. Another important rule was to sleep more during blizzards. In the cold, the body burns energy much faster to stay warm. If people kept busy, they would quickly exhaust themselves and lose heat. Instead, the Native Americans conserved energy by resting and sleeping longer. Even children were taught from a young age how to wrap themselves in hides, prepare bedding, and add wood to the fire at the right times. Beyond the physical, mental strength was equally vital. Days trapped inside a teepee during a snowstorm could easily lead to fatigue or despair. To keep spirits strong, they told stories, played simple games, or sang songs. Laughter and music not only passed the time but also strengthened family bonds. This closeness made huddling under thick hides not just a way to stay warm, but also a way to preserve hope. Thus, these survival principles were both scientific and social. They not only kept bodies warm but also trained discipline and resilience. If hides and fire were the tools, then these principles were the user manual that made the tools effective. By following them strictly, Native Americans transformed fragile teepees into true survival fortresses, allowing them to stand firm against nature's fiercest blizzards. While survival principles helped Native Americans maintain order and efficiency in daily life, they went even further with extreme defensive and survival measures, demonstrating their mastery of adaptation against both nature and enemies. The harsh winter brought not only blizzards and deadly cold, but also dangers from wild predators and rival tribes. For this reason, building a sturdy teepee alone was not enough. they transformed entire camps into sophisticated defensive systems. The first rule was choosing the right campsite. Native Americans never pitched their tipis near animal trails or close to water sources, places where wolves, bears, or other predators gathered. Instead, they chose dense groves or hillsides, which both shielded them from the wind and reduced the risk of encountering dangerous animals. This clearly reflected the link between wisdom and discipline. Safety began with choosing the right ground. Next was the strategy of turning snow into an ally. Beyond packing snow around the base of tipis for insulation, they built large snow mounds around the camp. These served not only as windbreaks but also as controlled pathways, forcing predators or intruders into predictable routes. In other words, they created snow mazes deliberately designed to manage threats. Thanks to this, hunters could respond to danger quickly and with less effort. In addition, the arrangement of tipis within the camp showed collective defensive thinking. Families with the strongest hunters usually pitched their tipis on the outer ring, forming a natural shield. Women, children, and the elderly were placed in the center, where it was warmer and safer. This was essentially a living fortress, in which every member had a clear place and role. During the fiercest blizzards, they even used a lifeline rope system. Ropes were tied from teepee poles to wood piles, food caches, or animal pens. Even when visibility dropped to almost zero, people could follow these ropes to move safely. Just a single misstep in a whiteout could be fatal, and these ropes literally became the lifelines of the community. Most remarkably, they knew how to use blizzards as natural shields. In the midst of raging storms, when predators or enemies could not move, they took the chance to relocate the camp or hide food and weapons. Howling winds and driving snow erased all tracks and muffled all sounds, making their actions invisible. This was a striking example of wisdom, turning danger into opportunity. Thus, these extreme defensive measures not only kept them alive but also gave them strategic advantages. Combined with survival principles, they turned teepees and entire camps into natural fortresses, where humans could resist blizzards, predators, and enemies at the same time. This was the pinnacle of survival intelligence, an achievement few civilizations in history have ever matched.